Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a comparison video, and I love doing these reviews because very few people are doing comparison videos, especially on this type of a fragrance. You see, many people that you see on YouTube that do these reviews are part of what are basically known as the Free Bottle Brigade. And the Free Bottle Brigade, their reviews cannot be trusted because it is in their best interest to basically say good things about them, because if they offend anyone from the brand, or let's say anything that could negatively impact sales, well, guess what? They won't get any more bottles. I am not part of said Free Bottle Brigade, so I basically bought both of these, and I believe I bought them both off of the same person. So this is the vintage bottle of Sultanate of Oman, which I actually prefer. The plate on the front seems to be metal. I don't know if you can hear that. And the new one, which kind of looks like this, the plate on the front seems plastic. Now, I'm sure this is some sort of cheap metal, but I actually like the fact that the colors of the Omani flag are on the Swarovski crystals, whereas then they went uniform with the newer bottles. But the plaques are different, but you can see, I mean, how it's all scratched up. It's just kind of cheap feeling plastic. I think they should have done better with the plaque, but I'm going to do some fresh sprays just because. On my left hand, I've got the vintage. And on the right hand, we are going to do the modern. And then we're going to compare and contrast. And we're going to talk about this fragrance. So let me do my... So the atomizer on the new one is better. I can tell you that. They went to the pressurized atomizer, which I like. It gives off a better distribution. You can control it better. So that is one plus with the new one. And so there's the two fragrances again. So we got vintage Sultanate of Oman over here, and then the more modern Sultanate of Oman. So, you know, this is kind of one of those content fragrance videos that I'm kind of gearing towards the hardcore frag heads, and I wish I had more detailed information to give you. The problem is that these fragrances are very, very close, okay? So little differences here and there are not really going to change very much. The fragrance is kind of what it is, but if you're searching through YouTube, let's say, and you see this for, I don't know how much this goes for, $400, and you see this for $800 because it's discontinued, is it worth buying the discontinued one? And I can tell you that these are so close that my answer is no. I think you should go for the modern if that's the case. If you get a good deal on the vintage, I actually like the vintage because it feels like the vintage is slightly darker and less fruity. So basically the biggest difference you're going to notice is in the first couple minutes. Right now, for example, it feels like the new juice is slightly... it's almost indiscernible, and it may just be my brain picking up things that aren't there, but it feels like the newer version is slightly sweeter and less heavy on the, you know, smokier papyrusy notes, and more heavy on the raspberry. Okay, so it's a little bit heavier on the raspberry. It's a little bit heavier on the orange. So it feels like that orange-raspberry combination play a bigger role. Whereas in the vintage, more of the cardamom comes to the front. So you get a little bit of this spicier type opening, and instantly this incense note comes forward. Whereas I feel like in the newer one, you get a little bit more of the orange and the raspberry and that sweeter opening before the incense really makes an appearance, if that makes sense. But Sultanate of Oman is probably my favorite from the entire Gulf collection, if you will. I think it's the best one because I am an incense lover. I'm a lover of frankincense and incense, and I've got the real deal here. Here's some actual frankincense tears. This one actually looks like a tear. And here's some different, you can see kind of the different color. This one's more myrrh looking, whereas this one's whiter. This could be more of the Hojari frankincense, the silver frankincense, if you will. But to me, you know, in a nutshell, okay, here's the Cliff Notes version. Because basically what this fragrance is this fragrance is a frankincense forward fragrance. And the reason is that Oman is the sort of breeding ground of frankincense for most of the world. Now, there are other places that there are good frankincense that comes from Somalia and stuff like that. But Oman is kind of the king of frankincense, and has been for thousands and thousands of years. And I want to try to talk about some of the history of frankincense with you guys, because I think it's important to realize just how vital this little thing right here put cities in certain places, put ports in certain places. You know, countries rose and fell over it. Expeditions were sent out to hunt down frankincense. That's how important it was. And so, see, right now, it's only been, what, a couple minutes? 5 minutes? And already they're so close to each other. I don't think the juice changed very much at all between the two, but I do like the vintage bottle. I'll tell you that much. I definitely like the vintage bottle. I think that if you twisted my arm in a nutshell, I would say that this version, if anything, was maybe made to just be a little sweeter and more fruity on the opening. And maybe that fruitiness does last a little bit longer into the dry down. But it could just be my imagination. Honestly, they are that close. Trying to nitpick something. Usually when you have something on your hand, like if I wore this one day, right? If I wore the new one day, and then the next day I wore this, which I tried doing before, I would say they're identical. But usually when you have them on your hand, one here and one there, and you're really comparing them and they're right next to each other, it's much easier to spot those little differences. And when it's this close and I'm just going, you know, it's kind of one of those things that doesn't really matter, then let's just talk about the fragrance. So both fragrances become, like I said, almost indiscernibly close to each other 5 to 10 minutes in. Say 10 minutes in is really when they become indiscernibly close. And I really feel like if you just imagine in your head like this fire burning on old Egyptian-style scrolls, like papyrus, right? Imagine papyrus wafting this incensey note into the air. That is what I think comes a little bit heavier in the vintage. I feel like it goes into the darker frankincense notes a little bit quicker, and I feel like you get a little bit more of the gentler, kinder, fruity notes in the newer version, okay? That's sort of the Cliff Notes version, if you will. And I like both versions are beautiful. I'll tell you that right now. This is one of my favorite incense fragrances of all time. And the reason is, if you've watched some of my videos on Roja, and I put up a ton. I have an entire Roja Dove playlist. You can go check it out. It's actually listed as Roja Parfums, but there's an entire Roja Parfums playlist of 20 plus fragrance reviews that I've done from his house. And one of the things that I've constantly said about Roja fragrances over and over and over again is that he likes to Roja them up. And by Rojaing them up, he makes them feel very opulent and grand and expensive. He makes the fragrance smell expensive. And here, if you go through the note listing, you're going to find stuff like oud, birch, saffron, carrot seed, iris, sandalwood, gaiac wood, guardian balsam, amiris, all of these notes. And I think that anyone that goes, yes, I pick up the iris, yes, I pick up the guardian balsam, yes, they're probably lying, because this fragrance is kind of put together in a way where it's very hard to pick and choose notes, because everything is pretty well blended, but it's blended in that Roja Dove style. And if you've smelled others from the Middle Eastern line, from his Gulf collection, you'll know exactly what I mean. I've got videos on the channel of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and UAE and stuff like that. You can go check those videos out. This falls into that category of fragrances, but with the emphasis on the frankincense really takes a step forward. Interestingly enough, it is December 27th, and today is the very first day I've worn a long sleeve shirt here in Texas. December 27th I made it to without having to pull out the long sleeve shirt, so damn. Today is a mark the calendar day for me, wearing a long sleeve shirt. But I will say that it is a beautiful fragrance. It's a fantastic frankincense because it does a couple things. Now, one thing that I will say is that it does not last forever. These people who say, oh, you're going to get 10 to 12 hours, bullshit. Absolutely not. For me, this is a 5 to 6 hour fragrance maximum, okay? But one of the things about frankincense is that there are beautiful frankincense fragrances out there that last an hour, take Armani's Bois d'Encens. That thing literally lasts an hour on my skin. And it's one of the most beautiful frankincense fragrances. So the fact that this at least lasts 5 to 6 hours, everything after that, sometimes you'll still be able to smell it for 7 hours, let's say. But everything after that, it's very light and fuzzy and muddled, okay? The other thing about this is that this is not an ashy, dirty frankincense. Maybe the vintage is slightly darker. I think the vintage is slightly darker. Again, maybe that's just my imagination, but I do think the vintage is slightly darker. But it's not a dirty, dark, cigarette, ashy smell. Not at all. To me, this is a very cleaned up frankincense. It's a lemony frankincense because it's frankincense and elemi. And elemi is kind of like a lemony, brighter frankincense, right? So the sun's shining right now. It's a bright day outside. Elemi gives this brightness to it, and it gives this freshness to it. It's like a fresher frankincense, but it's blended in a way where it kind of has, how Guerlain has a Guerlainade? Well, with Roja and these Middle Eastern lines, he basically has a Gulf collection odd, if you will. It really feels like there is a base that he has created for this Gulf collection that you smell over and over and over again. And so just imagine putting one of the highest quality incenses I've smelled straight on top of this luxury base. It's beautiful. It really is beautiful. There's no getting around it. I can't sit here and say, yep, there's the carrot seed, there's the birch, there's the cardamom there. I do think you get cardamom in the beginning. I think you get some of the saffron in the beginning. I think I could maybe see how it all is constructed, but breaking it down hour by hour, it's impossible to do just because of how well blended it is. And also, the newer one feels slightly fruitier, like I mentioned, but the older one feels slightly drier. So the vintage version does feel slightly drier. And it also feels like with the newer version that the raspberry and the orange, sometimes it feels like they really last a little bit longer into the dry down. So they go away, and then it feels like they come back. It feels like you can smell the fruitiness once the frankincense really takes over. Like I said, about 10 minutes in, these become very close, and I think that's because that's when the frankincense really takes over with this fragrance. And so once that happens, though, in the newer one, you can still really pick out the fruits, whereas with the vintage, I don't get as much of the fruit note in the vintage. I don't get as much of the orangey raspberry feel, okay? But I don't think either note is very dominant in either fragrance. I just think they come out a little bit more in the newer one, if that makes sense. So, before we go any further, I do just want to mention, since I just saw it, that I went to the mailbox today, and this was in there. So, a left turn in the middle of a review. But this was actually in there. I meant to show you guys first, so while I'm looking at it, I'm going to show you now. So, this is a vintage Jean Patou fragrance. Look at this. This is a pure parfum. And usually this is what a pure parfum looks like. Look how dark that is. This is Lasso. And this is courtesy of our good friend Andy. Thank you, Andy. Sorry for showing this off as a... Oh my God. But apparently this is a leather sheeper. I can't wait to get to know this. So thank you, my friend. Have you ever seen these boxes from Jean Patou? The box was these were still made in France. I believe this was from the 50s, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe 60s. But yeah, back when they actually made things like boxes in France. Who would have ever thought, right? Now everything's made in China. So let's talk a little bit about the history of frankincense, because frankincense is basically a tree resin, right? And it's produced, there's 5 different species, but I think the most sought after one is that Hojari frankincense, which comes from the B. sacra tree. And it produces the highest quality frankincense, known as silver frankincense, or this Hojari frankincense. And they mostly grow in the Dhofar Valley in Oman. That's where most of the high quality frankincense trees grow. And what's interesting is there is no farm, so there's no plantation of frankincense. It's not like oud where you can just farm it. They actually kind of grow wherever they want to grow. Sometimes you'll see them growing like out of rocks, out of the side of a rock. Sometimes you'll see a couple trees bunched together in a valley where water flows through, because they don't need as much water as normal trees, but they can't be farmed continuously. Excuse me, sorry to sniffle in your ear there. Let me get a drink of water. I've been fighting this cold. It is that time of year. So what's interesting is if you go all the way back, just to show you how far back in human history humans have appreciated frankincense, you can go all the way back to the year 1500 BC, okay, BC, where there are actually Egyptian scrolls that mention frankincense. Now, it's actually thought that going back as far as Mesopotamia, 3000 BC, maybe even 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, people were using frankincense. And obviously today, you know, we think of this note like a burning incense or incense for perfume, which we're talking about for here today. But in the old days, there was actually many other uses of frankincense. So ancient man would use it to smooth and oil his hair or her hair, almost like we use like argan oil today. They used it as a mouthwash of sorts, or like a toothpaste of sorts, because they used it to like sweeten their breath. People, they would chew it like chewing gum. You could actually, I guess, put this in your mouth and chew it. It seems kind of hard, but I bet you if you chewed it long enough, it would begin to break down. And they did things like take the soot after they burned it. They would take the soot of frankincense and use it for like eye paint. If you've seen the Egyptian eye paint on some of the pharaohs or stuff like that, or their gods looked like they had paint on their eyes, that was supposed to be soot of frankincense. Also makeup, of course. Well, I mentioned that, makeup. But also tattoos. So they would use the soot to make tattoos on their body. And they would use the resin, the frankincense resin, to actually fix broken pots and jars. So they would melt it, and once it turned into a resin, used it like we would use super glue. So look at all of the uses of frankincense from the ancient world. They would fill in the cracks of broken jars, if you will, in pots. The bark of the tree was actually used as dye, to like dye clothes or like give leather a certain tint of color. And of course, but it was most famous for burning during important events like births and weddings and funerals and special events. It was actually rumored that so much frankincense was burned when Roman emperors would return from, let's say, campaign. If they were victorious and they held a triumph, they would burn so much frankincense that the whole city of Rome smelled of frankincense for weeks. There was a rumor that when either Nero's wife or sister or concubine, I can't remember, but one of his loved women in his life died, they burned a year's worth of frankincense in one day. And they said that the whole city reeked of frankincense for like a month. So you can just imagine what that must have been like. Imagine burning for a year's worth of frankincense in one day for like a special event like that. And so if you think about it, whenever frankincense gets burned, what happens? Smoke goes up into the heavens, right? And when smoke goes up into the heavens, that is almost like a illustration. Like you're seeing this illustration of man's prayers being brought to God's ears, right? That's why it's so popular in church. Obviously, I think the most, the largest buyer of frankincense still to this day is the Catholic Church. Whenever they go around with they call them censars, those little things that they shake at you. It basically has like a top to make sure none of the actual burning material gets out. With a warm puck in there, they put the frankincense on top and they can shake the smoke out of it, kind of. So if you've been to any Catholic masses, pretty much ever, you've probably seen that, but especially on Easter and Christmas and stuff like that. Sorry, I'm trying to get logged back in here. There we go. And so I think probably every person on earth has smelled frankincense in one form or another. Of course, frankincense smells smoky, but it also has that lemony side. And I think that is where, in this particular fragrance, using elemi and a little bit of oud and a little bit of birch and all the other woody, the cedar wood, the gaiac wood, which gaiac wood is actually smoky in and of itself. Gaiac wood can have a little bit of a barbecue feel. The papyrus, which adds that burning paper-like smell. And it sort of gives off all of the major characteristics of frankincense without being too much. Sometimes frankincense is too much. Like if you've ever sat around a fire, right? Your clothes, your hair, everything smells like smoke for sometimes a day, until you go wash it out. And so if you can just imagine ancient man burning, let's say, logs of the frankincense tree with some of those tears on there and then smelling this fragrant material, once they started to smell how nice it smelled, better than just burning wood, they probably began to realize what it was, that it was the frankincense tears on the tree itself. And so this too heavy-handed smokiness when it comes to Roja's Sultanate of Oman is kind of toned down. It's not too much. It's a very, it's a luxury incense. Incense is 100% the star of the show in both of these, because they're 99.99% close, I think. They're very, very close. And sometimes when you're doing a comparison video, that's just the way it goes. A lot of times I'll do comparison videos of things that I expect to be different versions. And a lot of times they are different. These are very, very close. So at least you have to give shout out to the House of Roja for keeping the formula the same and not doing any major reformulations. Usually when bottles change, that's when major reformulations happen. So good for them for keeping the formula solid. And the materials still smell very high quality. And you pick up other things in here. Whenever incense is burned, if you go back even to the Egyptian days, the Egyptians had a schedule. So for them, they would burn frankincense in the morning, they would burn myrrh in the afternoon at high noon, and at nighttime, they would burn a secret blend called kifi. If you watched my Sultan Pasha interview, he actually mentioned this kifi note that he was very interested in learning about what it was. And he mentioned that in, I believe it was Sacred Scarab, had to have been Sacred Scarab, that there's a kifi note in there because that is representative of Egypt. But apparently it was a sacred blend. You weren't supposed to know what kifi was, but it was made up of things like frankincense and myrrh. Many people agreed that there was a raisin note in there and wine, which if you know Sacred Scarab, there's a wine note and a raisin note in there. And there's spices, grasses, conifers, mastic, bound together and sort of burned in this ritual. That was their ritual. But the reason I bring this up is incense, when you smell it, it's usually just more than just burning frankincense. Usually there's other things in the incense blend. And so that could be spices, it could be other types of wood. This just smells like a very luxury. Sultanate of Oman to me just smells like a very luxury, high quality incense is really the way that I would describe it. I think that Roja, of all of the countries, this is the one that he got right, the closest to what the country actually stands for in scent. Because of course Oman has amouage, right? And many of amouages, at least from the past, used to really highlight the note of frankincense and highlight their history. And that was one of the reasons that Sultan Qaboos decided to found amouage in the 80s. And so, incense obviously brings us to things like holy ritual and stuff like that. But if you get like a proper mental image, so the best way to describe the way that this smells to me is don't just think about the smoke rising. Obviously, everyone thinks about the smoke, and there is a little bit of a smoky aspect to this, but it's such a tame smoke. It's a luxury smoke is really what it smells like. But think about the fire itself. Imagine actually putting these incense tears being burned. Imagine having a fire that you're going to burn these on. And imagine sort of seeing the first tendrils of smoke begin to arise from the burnt piece of resin. And imagine that warmth from the fire. That imagination of the warmth of burning the frankincense, the first smoke coming off of a newly sort of burned piece. That is, I think, a great description of the way that Sultanate of Oman to me smells. It doesn't smell super ashy. It doesn't smell harsh. It doesn't have any of that harsh chemical like ashiness. You know, you would think that if you're smelling incense straight from the burner, that it would have some sort of a harsh, almost like it's going to make you cough, right? Like you're inhaling a cigarette for the first time, right? There is that, it's just going to make you cough type feeling. But the frankincense in here is very smooth, very soft, very mellow. I'll read you the blurb from Roja Parfums on what they have to say about Sultanate of Oman. And so here's what Roja has to say about Sultanate of Oman. By the way, this is $550 now. I didn't realize that it was this expensive now. This is $550. That's insane. And the other thing is they call this a parfum, a pure parfum. I mean, what I showed you from the Jean Patou is a pure parfum. Look how light, and I mean, this doesn't wear on my skin like a pure parfum. It wears like a eau de toilette or something along those lines. It doesn't wear like a pure parfum, you know, and it doesn't last like a pure parfum either on my skin. But it says, take a journey back in time to an ancient and mystical land where all the riches of the souk are laid out for the senses to enjoy. Beneath a blazing orange sun, an endless sea of stalls offer a plethora of local wares wandering through the maze of delights. A cacophony of scents fill the air, aromas of teas, fruits, and spices mixed with leather goods and sun-baked papyrus. As frankincense and oud burn in bakhors, the sense of adventure one feels when they spritz Oman is impossible to resist. So they did bring up something important there, and I think it was Arbaz who mentioned that in one of my previous videos I did on a brand, Louis Vuitton. They've got a oud rose saffron fragrance called Ombre Nomad, and he mentioned that smells like straight Bakhor to him. This is actually the one that I would think smells closer to Bakhor. I don't have any Bakhor to burn, but this is the one that I would think gives off that Bakhor-like feeling because it is so heavy on the frankincense and the quote-unquote oud. And it is beautiful. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. But if you're a fan of Bakhor, if it's something that you burn in your home, I think you would actually really like this one. The little blend that he has built, I think, plays well off of the frankincense. It allows the frankincense to shine without kind of overtaking it, if that makes sense. It still gives you, what's great about this fragrance to me is it allows the frankincense to sort of be the star of the show, but it also allows that luxury accord that Roja has built, which sometimes I give him a hard time for, and rightly so. But here, when something just comes together beautifully like this, I mean, you have to almost give it its props. He has built something where it allows the frankincense to stand front and center, but also you get the halo of everything else around it. It's actually really beautiful. So he says, the Gulf Collection is a series of scents which are lovingly dedicated to the individual personalities and characteristics of the countries across the Gulf, a region with a long tradition of holding perfumery very dear to its heart. For thousands of years, the Sultanate of Oman has been celebrated for producing the world's finest frankincense. The most revered of all frankincense, the warm balsamic characteristic of this incomparable material, forms the heart of this dedication to the kingdom from which it grows. Precious oud, sandalwood, and saffron mingle around it to bring a further richness of deep and exotic warmth, whilst an unfurling note of rose de mai lends a sweet and elegant background for frankincense to take center stage. So I have to say, I don't get very much rose. I don't get very much jasmine. I don't get very much violet. I don't get very much iris, not in the traditional iris form. Not like you're going to smell an iris note like in Dior Homme or something like that. No, not at all. Definitely as it dries, I think you will get a base of sort of the woods, the sandalwood, the cedar wood, the amyris, the gaiac wood, um, the oak moss. I think you'll get a little bit of that as it dries down. Amyris is a sort of plant from the citrus family, and some amyris wood actually exude elemi resin, if that makes sense. So you can see this elemi, fresher frankincense being pushed in different notes in this fragrance. And then, of course, it is balsamic. It is woody. It is, slightly smoky. It's slightly fruity, but never do I get, it's not like the raspberry note in the Moon or anything like that. It's not like the rose note in Ombre Nomad, which they claim there was no rose note in there, right? And so each one of these notes, like in the very beginning when you first spray, that's when I think I get the biggest hit of cardamom in the first half an hour to an hour. And then it begins to fade away. So there are some notes you'll pick, but most of it is the frankincense accord and everything around it that creates it. And it's beautiful. It really is. But good news is there's really not much of a difference. Slight differences here and there, but my expert opinion, as expert as I can be, even though I'm not an expert, I'm just a guy who likes perfume, but my expert opinion would be to say go for whichever one you can get is cheaper. Don't pay big money for the vintage because it's not worth it, unless you just want the vintage bottle, which looks cool. But if you're going for the juice, go for whichever one you can get. I think either one would be fine. So yes, I mean, if you're a frankincense lover, which I am, I'm a huge incense lover. I love incense. It's one of my favorite notes. This is one that you have to smell. I think this is one of the best incense fragrances out there. So yes, if you have experience with this, do let me know. Let me know what your thoughts are on Sultanate of Oman. Let me know what your thoughts are on if you have happened to smell the vintage versus the new one. I'd love to hear your thoughts, or just on the Gulf Collection or on Roja in general. Leave a comment. Hope you enjoyed a little bit of the history of frankincense. It's actually really cool. You can go back and get pretty detailed. I did a review of a fragrance from Amouage called Ubar. And Ubar is the name of a mythical city that popped up, they think somewhere in Saudi Arabia, that was supposed to be like one of the main stops of the incense trail, as they called it, or the Silk Road. Some of it was the Silk Road, some of it was the incense trail. But they say they could actually see the footprints in the sand, even today, from where the camels used to walk to get to the city of Ubar, is what they think. And so just imagine how many camels had to walk back and forth to make a path in the desert that they could see from space. And so it's crazy how this little thing right here, this little resin from a tree, influenced where cities were placed, where ports were placed, because sometimes they tried to sail around it because the journey through Arabia was pretty fraught with peril and risk. And here we are wearing a $500 fragrance that smells like it, and talking about it on YouTube. But yeah, it's just crazy how stuff like this influenced man and the history of man and what happened, ancient history. There was a little article I read on one of the pharaohs. I couldn't pronounce her name anyways. She was only one of 3 female pharaohs. They were saying she led like a raiding expedition, like basically started a war to try to go get more incense. That's how much they loved the stuff in the ancient world. And that's how much it meant to them, is they were willing to start wars, to fight wars over procuring more of this stuff. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you love incense as much as I do, try to get your nose on Sultanate of Oman. Thanks for watching, guys. Cheers, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.